Good evening. Hello and a very warm welcome to my YouTube station, Smita Sharma Journalist. And before moving ahead, a quick reminder, a thank you, of course, to all those who have already subscribed to the channel. For those who find the content, well, it may be a little boring, not dramatic, not theatrical like mainstream television, no screaming, shouting matches here. But if you find it informative, because we do a lot of content in English and Hindi, focusing on foreign policy, of course, but also on politics, on climate change, then do consider subscribing to the station, sharing the content, liking it, and essentially also pressing the bell icon notification so that you're alerted about any new content. Now, it's a special broadcast this evening because when you look at the number of Indians in the United States, of course, Indian diaspora itself has grown manifold in the United States today. And as of 2023, there are more than 5.2 million people of Indian descent who are residing in the United States. And amongst them, if you also look at the number of Indian students studying in the United States, it's a huge number. It's grown multiple times since 2000. If you were looking at these numbers, it's grown significantly. And in 2023, 2024, Indian students actually became the top source of international students across universities and in educational institutions in the United States, beating China. There was a 23% increase. And you're looking at more than 330,000 Indian students choosing US as their destination. More so, of course, that dream of a top-ranking Ivy League, that group of 8 institutes, the elite institutes, which is known for their research, which also includes the likes, of course, of Harvard, of Cambridge. But all of it seems to be in turmoil because you have President Donald Trump there who every day wakes up and then there is this new command, new executive order, new directive, sending both the domestic population as well as globally the world into a perpetual state of turmoil since he has taken over in this second term as president. And in the latest move, what he has done is he has now suspended all visa schedulings for interviews of those wishing to apply for student visas across the United States. Now, remember, he has already been completely at loggerheads with a lot of institutions, including Howard University, where he has said that there will be federal cuts. He has gone after Howard. He wanted to revoke their rights to be able to bring in foreign students. And this has led to a series of protests across Howard University too, but this time around with American students actually protesting because most of the foreign students, most of them from China, from India, they're choosing to remain quiet with all the large amount of suspense that remains about what really happens with their visas next. I was speaking just before the show today to a young student who's actually graduating tomorrow because incidentally, in a few hours from now, a new batch will be graduating from Howard University. The iconic journalist, Christiane Amanpour, is going to be delivering the keynote address at the commencement speech. But the Donald Trump administration has gone up to Howard saying that there are illegal activities happening on campus, referring to the pro-Palestinian protests, saying that there are anti-Semitism that is, of course, has increased in the campus. And now, not just with Howard, but with also the student visa applications being on hold, what the Trump administration is saying is that they want to go in for social vetting of these applicants. Question remains, what really happens next? A lot of the large number of foreign students, including Indian students, who have been asked to relocate to other campuses from Harvard. The matter is in court. On Thursday, there is an important judgment that is expected in the case involving Harvard University as well. And before I bring in my guests on the stage today, in fact, let me just quickly take you through one of the comments that Donald Trump, of course, he makes a lot of comments. Let me just add this one comment.
$52 billion, billions of dollars has been paid to Harvard. How ridiculous is that? Billions. And they have $52 billion as an endowment. They have $52 billion. And this country is paying billions and billions of dollars and then gives student loans and they have to pay back the loans. So Harvard's going to have to change its ways.
Okay, Harvard's going to have to change its ways, but what really does it mean as far as international students and Indian students are concerned? It's a question that I'm going to pose forward, of course, to our special guests here tonight on this show. And with me on the show, I have Anish Gawande, who is the spokesperson for the NCP, Sharad Pawar, and somebody who's actually went to an Ivy League himself, if I'm not mistaken. He's been to Columbia University also. He passed out of there in 2018. I'm also joined by Sudhanshu Kaushik. He is, again, an international, young activist, founder of Young India Foundation. He's authored a book called Future is Ours. I'm the executive director for North American Association of Indian Students. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me late in the evening here. And if I could start by asking you, Sudhanshu, I know right now, as I speak to you, you are, of course, in India, but what's the sense on the ground of this entire turmoil that students, and in particular the Indian students, are kind of wanting to make a sense of?
Honestly, Smitha, regardless of if I'm here or there, and regardless if the Indian students are here or there, it's a state of chaos. And if not chaos, at least a state of perplexity, confusion. We just don't know what comes next. Every single day, there's a new executive order. Every single day, we think, okay, this is it. And then every other day, he comes out with something else. I was purely, flabbergasted when the State Department, created a tweet and said, oh, if you miss class, your visa might be at risk. Anish, how many times did you miss class because, I don't know, you had something else come up? Oh, wait, you were sick. Oh, there's an interview. I mean, for real purpose, real excuses that they can use against you. And then the very next day, Smitha, the Marco Rubio, kind of leaks out the report, and then it comes out that they're actually pausing all student interviews. It's just every single day it gets worse. And I just don't know how students who have risked everything, right? They go to a new country, they take on loans, their families sell off land. The entire kind of family takes this risk to be able to send these students out and abroad. It's not just the rich Indian folks that are going, right? Higher education has been able to be more accessible in the past 2 decades. And as they go there, all these dreams and ambitions, and they just don't even know in some cases if they're going to get a degree or not. Not by because they failed a class, not by because they didn't attend class, but because a man sitting in the Oval Office decides that he just has it done with it. So I don't know. I mean, if I were them, I would totally be perplexed. We're getting a lot of phone calls, but for the first time, Smitha, we don't know any answers. When COVID was happening, we were getting calls. We could tell people exactly what was happening. When the student bans that were happening, we could tell people exactly this. But how are you supposed to have calm and composure when you just don't know what's next?
Absolutely. Anish, I mean, you are usually very calm and composed. First of all, to answer Sudhanshu's query, and if you could unmute yourself, what was your student life like? And today, when you're talking to students in the United States, what's the stark differences that you feel?
Smita, I think I entered the United States on a Barack Obama presidency and exited the United States to come back to India on a Donald Trump presidency. So I think it was a fairly tumultuous student life when I was up in New York City. And I think what set it apart from so many other places was that even while I was an international student at Columbia, and Sudhanshu and I have worked together on some of these things, I never felt like what I said was ever going to affect whether or not I could continue on in the United States. I could speak out against the president, including against Obama when he was president, and then against Trump when he was president. I could speak out against Prime Minister Modi like I do even now today. And never was I worried about the consequences it would have. Today, I have so many young students, regardless of whether they're going to Harvard or affected by the sort of recent pause or not, telling me, oh, should we delete our Twitter history? Should we delete what we've said before? Should we ask The Wire or some other publication to take down the article we've written? What can be used against us? If we want to go get an education, I mean, I think it's truly unfortunate that we've put freedom of speech and the right to get an education at odds with each other. And as Sudhanshu said, the reality today, we absolutely have no answers. I have been from Maharashtra. Should I go for my
Anish, I'm afraid there is a lot of background noise, and I think I understand you're in a public place. If you could request people around you, maybe hush them a little bit, not silencing their voice, but just lowering their decibels a bit. And I'll come back to you again. But, Sudhanshu, honestly, before I ask about what's really going to happen next and the legal implications of this point that Anish was raising, students have been going to the United States and its top institutions for a lot more than just getting a degree. And the amount of money that people actually end up spending. This young girl who was saying that, currently in a public policy course in the Kennedy School, you're paying at least $120,000 for fees without living expenses. And most of the students who do not have a scholarship would be taking loans. So they would actually want to be able to stay back in the US after their course to be able to earn some money, which would make it easier for them to pay back the loan in dollar terms. Everything has just gone in for a tumult. And, for the first time, they're discussing whether they should actually consider other institutions outside of the United States, whether they should come back. So, that in sense of the institutions of the United States, that's crumbling down.
Yeah, I've said this before. U.S. higher education for international students is a $50 billion economy every single year. That's a lot of money, right? And this is something that we have on record that, really does not just help universities, right? This is what perplexes me when the administration says, oh, all these universities or whatever. These students come. They go to not just a Harvard or a Yale, they go to University of South Dakota. They go to, a University of South Carolina. They go to random places in the United States, these college towns, and they're able to really engage with the local economy there too. They're taking the same Ubers, they're eating the food, they're really adding a surplus to that economy. They're helping Americans, right, and their small businesses to be able to have, that bottom line that they desperately so need. And then you're turning your head back on them and saying, no, actually, you're not allowed, right? It just doesn't make sense why you would break this very thriving economy. And it honestly is a zero-sum game. The United States benefits through and through from international students, right? I wouldn't say, and if I were to go on a limb and say, I think international students don't benefit that much from a U.S. higher education, at least a majority of them. Some of us have, for sure. And you're breaking that down piece by piece. I mean, it is so frustrating. And so maybe this is not to answer your question, but there's something that I feel really passionate about, though, is that while we keep pushing U.S. higher education, while it's become more accessible, we just need to also be sure that we're careful. The system was not student friendly. In fact, all this private equity money, all this VC money had made the process of studying in higher education more accessible, but also more manipulative. It was a really, really deep hole that was being dug. And I think that this might, I hope, bring a little bit of a shock into the system, which, uncalled for, but still that there needs to be some sort of reset. Very, very predatory interest rates on student loans, very, very predatory student recruitment processes going where you're sending students where they should not be going just for the better referral fee. And both universities and agents here were to blame. And so I hope that also helps because students were not having a good time before either.
Right. And of course, even now, the entire considerations of the slowdown in economy, the job factor, all of these are also adding up. Many students are realizing that it's going to be a much, much tougher, challenge for them even to find a decent job to actually pay back for what you're saying is, the premium educational economy that has been set up. But Anish, coming back to this question, for instance, this entire battle against Harvard, and where Donald Trump actually said that no rallies, we will vet your social media. It's an institute that has also, been the institute for past presidents, including Barack Obama. Donald Trump's fight here against Harvard, do you feel it will only stop at Harvard or the other Ivy League institutes will also be next? And B, is it really the monetary considerations that he rakes up? Is it the homeland security allegations of, the Chinese connection, or the foreign students not paying enough, and the Harvard having its own money, but we are having to spend it on foreign? Do you see any justification in his rant against Harvard University right now?
Smita, I hope that there's less background noise here than there was earlier. Okay, I'm glad. We've all come to take President Trump's words with a grain of salt, right from the comments on the conflict between India and Pakistan to the recent justifications for the denial of visas to any international students coming to the United States, we've realized that there simply is no rationale that is being offered by the government, or really no answers that are being given by the government for the decisions that they're taking. And I think that's what's incredibly concerning. As I was telling you earlier, we have a lot of students from Maharashtra approaching us right now asking, should I go for my visa appointment? Should I not go for my visa appointment? Should I delay my visa appointment? And if there was a framework in place that let you know that X, Y, Z are the reasons for which the visas have been paused for now, and they will be opened on this date or when these conditions are fulfilled, you could have an answer to give. But everyone is working on guesswork right now. And I think the reality, unfortunately, is, and I think Sudhanshu is very right when he says that the system was never perfect to begin with, that this is going to open the doors for many other universities to take advantage and for the rest of the world to step up where the United States is stepping down. And I think you're coming to a moment of reckoning, although I wish it had not come at this stage, where you're going to see the very idea of a US higher education program being beneficial to people outside the US. Now, I say this, but at the same time, I also want us to acknowledge that several institutions that students are going to are institutions that are either funding their education or are institutions where their education is being funded by scholarships, by fellowships, by grants, including those by the government of India. So this has been one of the few ways, particularly in a country like India, for several students who come from backgrounds that are not those of privilege to have a real chance at social mobility. And what we are denying them today, especially those who are affected right now, is that chance at social mobility because of decisions taken in a spurt of impulsiveness.
Yeah. Okay. I can hear you. Carry on, Anish.
That was all I had to say.
Yeah. The problem is that whatever we may say of President Donald Trump, at the end of the day, he is the world's most powerful man today. Whether we take it with a grain of salt or buckets of salt, the problem is that so far we've seen in his second term that he's actually delivered on the kind of campaign promises that he made to his domestic constituents. So, in far as these kind of moves on the student community is concerned, Sudhanshu, often we say that, with the BJP government here, that whether the liberals and the seculars approve of it or not, there is that huge domestic constituency that the prime minister is catering to. Similarly with President Trump, initially people thought, oh, he's going to come in, he's going to crack down on illegal immigration, that wall with Mexico will be up. But now you have international students left with the question, do we fall in the illegal migrant category? Do we fall in the illegal migrant with the legal visa category? Is his own party, are people, who have supported, who have voted for Trump, how are they reacting to these moves in particular when it comes to the student community and educational institutes?
Yeah, just to preface this, by the way, a lot of Indian Americans did vote for Trump this time in very large numbers. In fact, in the precincts of Sugar Land, Texas, Edison, New Jersey, and basically the Bay Area in California, you had a vote shift of almost 80 to 90% from 2020 to 2024. I want to preface that by saying, people said, oh, no, they're going to go after the other guys, right? Exactly what you said. Is that they're going to go after the undocumented people that are coming. They're going to go after, those that have come through illegal means or are criminals. This is what we used to hear from the Indian American community in terms of, why they voted for Trump or were voting for Trump. And now you're going after law-abiding, paying those that pay their taxes, those that are, coming in terms of all legal measures. You're going after them. And it's really confusing. So when you look back at the campaign rhetoric, when you look back post-inaugural for Donald Trump, he went on record publicly to say that he liked F1 visas and J1 visa students, those that were coming in to the universities to study, to be able to benefit. They gave it. He even made the argument for us. He said that they were contributing to the local economy. They were doing all this. That's not my argument. That's Donald Trump's argument. And unfortunately, we did have ideological, in hindsight, of what, certain people within the Trump administration wanted. But, when the man himself is saying that he wants to protect with Elon Musk, H1B and OPT, etc., you think, okay, there's hope here. And yet we still knew that this was going to happen. Why? Because you had people like Steve Bannon saying that, this needs to end. You had Project 2025, which explicitly restricted student immigration. So the signs were there. It's just people like me, but also a lot of Indian Americans refused to look at them. And I think that was the biggest mistake. I'm hoping that things would have been different. But I just, it's interesting because you're trying to assess what the Trump administration wants. And you think of it from he's going to try to make better deals for America economically. Well, this isn't a really good economic deal. Then you think about from an ideological reasoning and what Trump's, kind of perspective has been. Oh, wait, he's literally gone back and forth on this 10 times in the matter of a month, let alone the past year. And then you think of it from a perspective of, okay, what are the people in the administration, the stakeholders want? And then you have an Elon Musk who's betting for H1B and OTB and F1 visas. And then at the same time, you have, someone like a Steve Bannon or the other administrative folks who are really pushing the needle on this and trying to make it as painful as
including Marco Rubio. I mean, he's currently, of course, taken over Musk's job as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's trying to prove himself or if he's ideologically aligned or he actually might not have much of a say, right? Immigration was not supposed to be at all by any means a Department of State issue in this administration. It was supposed to and is being handled by 2 or 3 people in the White House, not even the Department of Homeland Services. So I think that, a lot of these people, whether it's Marco Rubio, whether it's Kirstie Allison, these are just placeholders, right? This is a purely White House, very ideologically administered perspective that's really going out there. And again, to me, it doesn't make any sense economically, ideologically, but also what just plain better for Americans.
Anish, you mentioned that you have been getting distress calls from students, in the US. You are in the opposition here. And with this government, whether it's the issue of the ceasefire, which Trump has now even put in writing, says it's actually US brokered. But leave aside that for a moment. On this issue also, we've seen some public statements from China asking US to actually make sure that, the international students are treated fairly, that they're not put in a pickled position. Do you think the Indian government needs to do much more? I mean, I do not doubt that they're not having these conversations within closed doors. But publicly, do you think there has to be some different posturing from the government on these issues, something that the government can possibly do?
So, Smita, to be perfectly honest, I think the Indian government has taken this up with the United States administration, and we await to hear the results of those discussions. But I want to divide the response on 2 fronts. There's always been a number of back channels that have existed for several of us, including those in the opposition, to engage with both diplomats and those in the US government for instances like these when they're urgent. For example, when someone's parent is in a hospital and the child wants to go from India to the US, or you get an emergency visa. So there have always been back channels that exist for exceptional cases. What you're witnessing now, and I want to build upon what Sudhanshu just said, is that this is not about individual cases. Right? This is now about state policy. And when another country is trying to interfere with a sovereign nation state policy, you have to be very careful at all levels, regardless of whether I'm asking about whether or not this kid should go for their visa interview or whether or not the Indian government is saying take care of the needs and interests of Indian students who are applying to the US. So at this point, if it is a domestic political priority for the Trump administration to do this, there's really very little that the Indian government can do except encourage that those who are already in the US be allowed to remain there, or that the sort of prospects of those who continue to remain in the US are protected. I think the bigger challenge is also that this seems to be the lowest hanging fruit for a Trump administration that is eager to have a high impact campaign that is felt across the globe, right? The wall with Mexico is not built. The other big promises have not been fulfilled. And so when you've got something that's this high profile being executed by the President of the United States, you can ensure that systems are created to protect Indian students, but you can't really dictate policy. What I do think needs to happen, which I do think our government needs to work harder towards, is ensuring that all the students who got NOS scholarships, the National Open Scholarships, and the scholarships provided by state governments across the country for students willing to study abroad and wishing to study abroad are honored, right? And that students who got these scholarships are not left in the lurch, that their futures, which they have set aside their jobs, that they've set aside their careers for, are not hampered. And I think it's now our responsibility to ensure that we have alternatives that we provide for these students in light of what is happening in the US currently. Beyond that, I genuinely don't know, as Sudhanshu has also pointed out, what the next steps in this entire situation are, whether or not students will be able to proceed, whether or not courts will put an end to these pauses, whether or not, again, students will be scrutinized for their social media before they enter the United States, and whether or not you will now see new criteria for denials of entry.
But Anish, these were some of the many questions that this young student was actually raising in my conversation. And of course, she chose to be anonymous about it. I mean, she's getting a degree tomorrow. I was reading all these statements across websites, whether it's BBC, Al Jazeera, one of the students saying, suddenly everything in my life feels uncertain, including coming back to America in the fall. So if you're leaving the US, going home for a break, you're uncertain. If you've applied for something, you're uncertain. If you're on campus right now for the next academic year, you're uncertain. And to top it all, the big question is, can they stay legally? And will someone actually employ these students within the United States, considering that, if Donald Trump is there for at least for the next 3 years or so, the students' visas, if they remain in flux, will they remain employable within the United States? Anything to add there, Anish?
No, they won't, right? Because many students who get employed in the United States get employed on their OPT, right? On their optional practical training, which is directly tied to their I-20s. And if their sort of recognition is cut off, if their I-20 refuses to be, is not valid anymore, then the job that they have, which is on that temporary sort of visa accreditation before they can even apply for an H-1B, ceases to exist. So it places young Indian students who just graduated as well in a sort of heightened state of risk, because they don't know whether the job they have tomorrow will continue to exist. Now, of course, lower courts have ensured that a stay has been put on the decision on I-20s, at least for students who are currently in the US, including those at Harvard, who would otherwise have to leave the country within 60 days. But the concern there is that we don't really know. And let me remind you, though, Smita, we don't see this as an unprecedented, right? In his first term in office, Donald Trump had instituted the Muslim ban, right? Where he said that students from 9 countries, and indeed anyone from 9 countries, would not be allowed to enter the US at all. And at that time, we had similar concerns raised, including at Columbia University, where we actually spoke to trustees to ensure that the students from these 9 countries who were part of the university were sort of represented and defended in courts. But you have to realize that the scale then was very different from the scale now, because now you're dealing with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students who are affected by the decisions of this administration. And we'll really have to wait and watch to see how the courts play out their game and their hand. We've also seen increasing frustration of the Trump administration with the courts, and a growing frustration with the courts curtailing what the administration can do.
Right. Sudhanshu, is there something that you would like to add to it, keeping in mind that Thursday is when we have the next court hearing? I know we can't, of course, preempt what the court is going to say, but what would be your advice to the students who are asking all these questions to us right now?
Yeah. How am I supposed to give advice to anyone in this situation, right? No one, including lawyers who are working on this issue, no mentor that has sent for the past 25, 30 years students abroad. No one has an idea on what's happening. What I would just suggest is to be mentally strong, emotionally, be there, to know that even though this is very, very turbulent times, very uncharted territories, that something will work out. You know, we didn't expect the injunction that happened with the court, and yes, it did, right? So I do think that there will be, and precedent has shown that the court has stepped in, and thankfully for a more positive decision and framework, if you look at it in hindsight. So I think that we need to have some sort of faith, even though faith is really hard to have in these times. And the other thing I would suggest for newcomers is to understand that the next 3.5 years will be like this. They will be back and forth. So if you can figure out a way to defer your admission maybe a year and say it's 2 years, then you'll be probably graduating at a time when hopefully this administration is winding down. Can you afford that? Does it make sense?
Nobody knows if they'll actually wind down or not. I mean, we really don't know.
I hope so. I hope that this is just a time and place, and I think that people will also understand, by the way, Smitha, that look, I understand in politics money talks. The heavier the wallet, the better it is for your political prospects. And I do know and think, and Republicans will also realize this alongside Democrats, that international student body, when we're talking about $50 billion, it's not just money going to the universities, right? People feel it in those mom and pop shops. People feel it in the local towns. People will feel it when the kind of intake of federal tax money is decreased, because 1 million people is still a lot of people who, by the way, still pay tax in the United States. So I think that people will see the economic benefit. And I think there will be a change of recourse. But I hope we don't even have to go to that. I think that, look, the Trump administration has been testing the courts. It's been trusting its authority. And then you've also seen them back off, right? And they've done it multiple times. Anish was talking about the Muslim ban. I can give the reference of the COVID student ban that happened at the almost end of his term during COVID. And basically, as soon as they went to the courts, they had to take it back. NAAS was actually on the court docket and actually sued the Trump administration. So it's happened before, and I hope to God it'll happen again. But hopefully we'll have some restraint and we'll have some sort of normalcy.
Okay, just one last question to the two of you, a slight digression from the overall topic that we are talking about. I mean, both of you really came out of college just a few years ago. I mean, you both are actually much younger than me, and I'm dating myself here on the show. But, the fact is that just still a few years ago, both of you were being able to take to activism on the campuses, do politics on the campuses. Today, whether it's a Trump cracking down on anything to do with diversity, equality, or actually going after students. And while Howard may say, and Howard is stressing on the fact that Howard is not Howard without its foreign students, the Trump administration is making it very clear that, look, studying in the US institution is a privilege. It is not a right at the end of the day. And that Sudhanshu mentioned that, look, these are issues that also border on the country's sovereignty and domestic decisions. Having said that, do both of you really feel that the space for student politics across the world, whether it's the world's largest democracy in India today or the oldest democracy in the United States today, it's all kind of winding down? It's really, and Indians who are not even able to protest on streets in campuses here on most days across our universities, they perhaps shouldn't think that, you can go in there and indulge in any activity when it comes to taking a stance on certain issues. Is that space really sort of shrunk at the moment? Any of you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that, and I think Anish will do a much better job in kind of concluding this. But look, I think that there are variations. There's a lot of back and forth. The pendulum swings here and there. What I'll say is that if you look at history, times like these have come, and there has been an overcoming of them. If you think about it from the United States perspective, the Vietnam War in the 70s, right? And the amount of student protests that erupted, but also the clampdown on those student protesters, right? You think about emergency here in India that happened, right? These times have come in back and forth, and I think student politics and young people have always been under attack. Have there been, parts of timelines in the past, 2-3 decades where we've had some really good success in terms of getting young people that freedom that they wanted? Of course. But I do think that, the attack on young people isn't something that's new. The attack on freedom of academic, kind of thought is not new. The attack or the limitation of student protesting in any country is not new, whether it's Africa or whether it's the United States or whether it's India. There have been many variations. There have been ups and there have been downs. And I think that whatever is happening right now, there will be a sense of overcoming as long as young people are committed. Young people are, they have that kind of foresight there to know that this just happens. And look, I mean, Smitha, you've seen the photos. You've seen at universities at UC Berkeley when the Vietnam War was happening, how literally people were watered and hosed down, right? So this has happened many, many times, and the administration has clamped down. So I think that we will overcome this. I think that this will be one for the history books. And I think that this is our generation, our young people's kind of fight. It's in a way, we're not fighting the Vietnam War, but this is kind of our idea of, hey, what are we doing and what we stand for, and whether
it's the war for values and ideologies. Anish, in conclusion, it's also interesting to see that Hong Kong University of Science Technology jumped in and offered that, students from Harvard, if you have to relocate, come in. It's not like tomorrow students can go in and actually take in a moral position and stand even in a university in Hong Kong. That's going to be even more lesser so. So in conclusion, your words, I mean, not without hope is what Sudhanshu says. What do you think?
Students are a threat to power everywhere. Those same students who are protesting at Harvard University will protest in Hong Kong, will protest at Jamia. And very few who think that they can silence the voices of students have ever succeeded in history, and very few, if any, will succeed in the days and months to come. I think the reality is that we have dealt with such situations before. We've seen global movements built around student protests in the past. In 1968, it was the student protests across campuses across the United States of America that actually led to a wide-ranging coalition, including those labor unions and queer rights activists, of so many different people who were dissatisfied with these clampdowns on freedom, that caused a national movement to emerge that had ripple effects across the world, not just the US. And I think what you're witnessing today is a global movement, that students at Harvard or Columbia who've been told to shut up and sit down if their visas will be revoked if they speak out, are still speaking out. The students at Jamia who are told that their VC will file police cases against them if they don't shut up are still speaking out. The students at Aligarh Muslim University who are told that they should be silenced are still speaking out. And the students in Hong Kong who, after Nathan Law was arrested and a lot of student movements were disrupted there after 2017, have faced existential threats to their personal liberty, they are also still speaking out. So I think the reality is that the voice of students will continue to be heard. I think you're going to see a tough battle ahead, but I don't think we've ever been more prepared than we are today. And I don't think that anyone is backing down.
And spoken like a true politician with much promise, of course, Anish Gawande and Sudhanshu Kaushik, of course, in the neighborhood also, whether it's, Sri Lanka to Bangladesh, we have seen these protests overtake all kinds of political clampdowns and, crackdowns on freedom of speech expression. But many thanks, both of you, for joining me this late in the evening. To our viewers, they're both there on Twitter, X, on Insta. Follow them. You can engage with them. Thank you so much. Appreciate joining me here. And to all those who tuned in as well, thank you so much. Do subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Goodbye and take care.